Today's reading is from Matthew 13. Jesus told them another parable. The kingdom of heaven is like this. A man sowed good seed in his field. One night, when everyone was asleep, an enemy came and sowed weeds among the wheat and went away. When the plants grew and the heads of the grain began to form, then the weeds showed up. The man's servants came to him and said, "Sir, it was good seed you sowed in your field. Where did the weeds come from?" "It was some enemy who did this," he answered. "Do you want us to go and pull up the weeds?" they asked him. "No," he answered, "because as you gather the weeds, you might pull up some of the wheat along with them. Let the wheat and the weeds both grow together until harvest. Then I will tell the harvest workers to pull up the weeds first, tie them in bundles and burn them, and then to gather in the wheat and put it in my barn." When Jesus had left the crowd and gone indoors, his disciples came to him and said, "Tell us what the parable about the weeds in the field means." And Jesus answered, "The man who sowed the good seed is the Son of Man. The field is the world, and the good seed is the people who belong to the kingdom. The weeds the people who belong to the evil one. And the enemy who sowed the weeds is the devil. The harvest is the end of the age, and the harvest workers are the angels. Just as the weeds are gathered up and burned in the fire, so the same thing will happen at the end of the age. The Son of Man will send out his angels to gather up out of his kingdom all those who cause people to sin and all others who do evil things, and they will throw them into the fiery furnace, where they will cry and gnash their teeth. Then God's people will shine like the sun in their Father's kingdom. Listen then, if you have ears." So, are you the wheat or are you the weed? Because that's more often than not our first thought with this passage. It's our human nature. We have this inbuilt binary way of thinking. We like to know who is in, who is out, who is right, who is wrong, who is accepted and who is excluded. We use it to place ourselves within groups and within society. And you see it right from the early days of life. I remember watching toddlers playing and forming the hierarchy of who was allowed in the playhouse. Now, I don't know what they were basing it all on, but some were allowed in and others were not. Some were accepted, others were excluded. You see it in schools as children form friendship groups. If you've watched Grease or High School Musical, St. Trinian's, even Harry Potter to some extent, they all parody those groups formed within that environment. But remember, that parody is based in truth. Friendship groups are formed on the basis of skills. Sometimes, are you sporty, are you musical, are you a science or a maths nerd? And sometimes on other things, maybe on music and clothing preferences. But in all cases, there are some people who are in and some who are out. We never grow out of it. You see it within the working environment. Some companies thrive on it. They pitch one team against another in order to increase performance and productivity. And you see it really in any group that you might belong to, particularly those that have got a criteria for joining. That criteria might be gender or age or a skill or something else. But if you're in one of those groups, you know that you're in and you know that others are not. Because it's so inbuilt, we find ourselves doing it within our faith too. We try not to. We say all are welcome and they should all be welcome. But honestly, if we're really honest, sometimes we have to remind ourselves of that. We forget ourselves. You find yourself deciding who is a proper Christian, who really has a faith, who's getting their child baptised for the right reasons, who's just coming for the gossip or the free food or to pass some time. And that's before we even start on the debate and the judgment and the treatment of black and minority ethnic groups or LGBT people. Mostly, our judgment is unintentional. Mostly. But even so, it's still there. In today's reading, we see that nothing is clear-cut. We'd like everything in life to be split into two, right and wrong, the kingdom or not in the kingdom. But it's never really that simple. The wheat, the good, and the weeds, the bad, they grow side by side. They're indistinguishable. Nobody can tell them apart until they're almost fully grown and formed. Right at the end, once the wheat's head is formed, right at the end of its life, then its life is over because it's harvest time. Now, I generally prefer not to think of this parable as people, but rather the good and the evil in the world. It's a parable, it's a story to get the point across, and the people hearing it will understand. And I believe that Jesus used people in this way as an example here, just to drive the point home. However, let's just assume I'm wrong for a moment and take the parable exactly as it's told. Because even then, it would be impossible to distinguish who was in the kingdom of God and who is heading for that fire with weeping and wailing and gnashing of teeth. It would be impossible to tell until that very last stage, just before harvest time. It's probably a good thing, because if we knew, if we could definitely define good from bad, wheat from weeds, then we're going to try and dig up a few weeds, aren't we? And pulling out the weeds disrupts the plants. I've seen it happen, and I'm sure you have too. All actions have consequences, and there's often that ripple effect too. In its crudest form, the exclusion of one person judged to be a weed if you like, will have an effect on their whole family and all their friends. And the thing is, if we take just one message away from this parable, it's that it's not ours to judge. At the end of time, the angels, not us, the angels will come and sort it out. The judgment is not ours to make, it's not our responsibility. And we should be thankful for that, because as we've already established, we really can't tell. All we can do is make sure that our own lives are in order. So if we think back to last week, we can make sure that our own soil is good, that our faith is well rooted to establish growth and produce good fruit. We can keep our eyes firmly on the sun through the good and the challenging times. And when things feel tough, we remind ourselves and each other that, as Jesus puts it, there will be a time when God's people will shine like the sun in the Father's kingdom.